you, all of you out there this evening. Thank you for joining us for this time that we have together. Um, as Rachel mentioned, my name is Sherry Colomb. I'm one of the caregiver trainers here at the Alliance, and every 3 months or so, I have the opportunity to come here over to the CARES side of the house and take a caregiver topic and sort of tackle it from a trust-based relational intervention point of view. So when we talk about TBRI, that's what we're talking about, trust-based relational intervention. And if you are familiar with TBRI, that is awesome. I'm glad you have a little background knowledge and information about that. Some of you, as I see some names that are familiar popping up in this room, I see some of the folks here that have maybe taken some of our TBRI courses or popped up in some other trainings that I've been a part of. So welcome. It's great to see some familiar faces. And others of you maybe aren't so familiar with what trust-based relational intervention is. Glad to have you here this evening and be able to give you a quick little introduction to that. But either way, whether you're familiar with what TBRI is, whether this is your first kind of dipping your toe in those waters, you are, first of all, very, very welcome. And your whatever level of knowledge you're bringing to this tonight, you will still be able to fully participate and hopefully walk away with things that are helpful and useful to you. We just want to be able to look at the situations that anyone who's interacting with youth here in our kind of child welfare world, to be able to approach the particular situations that we face from that perspective of how does trauma impact the developing brain. So when we talk about what is TBRI, what is trust-based relational intervention, really what is trauma-informed care, that's what we're talking about. So when we think about what's TBRI, it's really how do we take what we know about brain development, trauma's impact, and then how can we apply strategies that are going to work and help with this particular demographic of kids that we're all here to serve. So with that in mind, we are going to be looking at that, using that to tackle our subject for the evening. So let me pause here for just a second. I am going to share my PowerPoint screen. So give me just a moment to get things set up. And I will just say once again, thank you all for being here. It was kind of fun just watching the registrations for this class to trickle in. It's what, Tuesday night? There's a long day of work behind, I'm sure, every single one of you, whether that's chasing kids, whether that's work, whether that's working kids, whatever it is, you have a lot of other things you could probably be doing this evening, and yet you're here. So I have just nothing but kind of respect and gratitude for the fact that you decided to spend your time hanging out with us tonight. So a couple things I want to do before we get started. The first one you can see up on the screen. As an alliance, one of the things we like to do whenever we have the opportunity to get a group of folks together is just pause and share together in a moment that we like to call a territorial land acknowledgement. And really all this is just a chance to stop and think kind of like, where are we just geographically at this particular moment in time? So I would love you just to think, where are you planted at this second in time? City, town, location, right? Because wherever we are all on the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples. I have the unique privilege in my personal world of splitting my time between two locations. I kind of spend my permanent full-time life is in Omak, Washington, and you get an extra gold star of the evening if anybody knows where that is. So north central Washington, a very small little rural town north of Wenatchee, hour from the Canadian border. and Spokane. I kind of flip between the two for kind of health and school related reasons for a kid of mine. We've had to kind of step out of our rural community because we needed a few more services for this season of life. So I'm bouncing between the two. Um, and so I am either on the lands of the Spokane and Umatilla peoples, where when I'm in my Spokane world, or the Colville Confederated Tribes when I'm in my OMAC life. So we want to just recognize that we're all on the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples. There's 29 federally recognized tribes here in Washington. There's others that are still working and fighting towards that recognition. And here in Alliance, we're really wanting to make sure in all the work that we do that we're being good listeners, we're being good learners. We want to lift up Indigenous voices. We want to be good partners. And we just really want to make sure we recognize that anytime we have a group of people together and just make sure that we have an opportunity to give that a shout out. So anyway, hopefully y'all are fairly familiar with Zoom, right? Since COVID, have spent a lot of time hanging out in virtual platforms like this. And I know since we have such a fun group of us in our meeting tonight, we probably won't have a chance to like jump on the microphone and do like in-person introductions. So, but I would kind of like to know just kind of where is everybody at this evening? So if you're comfortable with it and if you know how to use your Zoom chat box, would you be willing just to jump on Zoom and just tell us where you're at tonight? You don't have to give us your address, we don't have to get that personal, but just tell us like city or town where you're at, or county, whatever's closest to you. And if you know the tribal lands that you reside on and want to share that, we'd love to hear that as well. But it's just fun when we get a group of people together like this to have a chance to kind of see like, where's everybody coming from? Sometimes as caregivers, it can feel like you're kind of at home alone, maybe doing hard work with kids that maybe have some challenging behaviors. And it's just sort of fun to know, hey, spread across our state, there's others that are doing the same work and caring for kids in their ways too. So can you guys see it? I've seen people from Vancouver, from Moxie, if anybody doesn't know where that is, kind of think Yakima. All right, that's another Sherry, love that. Outside of Yakima, Ording, Spanaway, all kinds of greater Seattle area folks, Yelm, Nisqually, Kitsap, Lucinda's from Wenatchee. That's another person, kind of one of my little corners of the world. Um, Fun just to see where everybody's kind of trickling in from. We've got some Everett Puyallup folks here. Oh, I see another Wenatchee person. Urbano, great to have you here too. Olympia, I didn't see any Olympia folks. Zach, welcome, Zach. I grew up in Edmonds, or I grew up in Shoreline, so Edmonds is kind of like feeling like home as well. Julie, great to see you here. So yeah, and Shelly's here from 9 Mile Falls. Great to see you. Anyway, so just want to, you might have some neighbors in this class for all we know about. So just want to just bring us together in what ways that we can in the virtual world in which we all exist anymore. So I mentioned that I have been working as a TBR or with the caregiver training program here at the Alliance. I'm what's called a TBRI practitioner. So I've been able to get some, I don't know, specially certified to be able to share TBRI principles and practices with caregivers here in Washington. So I'm excited to be able to do that here with this group tonight. And a little bit of just kind of personal background. I've been working as a caregiver trainer here at the Alliance for, I don't know, 8-9 years in this kind of capacity. Prior to that, I was supporting caregiver training kind of in some different roles through like more contracty kind of work. So I've been hanging out caregiver training-ish, probably close to 15 years, and really kind of morphed into sitting on this side of the Zoom camera just through that little kind of zippy and unexpected little twist that life can take. Because, like maybe many of you in this group tonight, I made that decision at some point in time to become a licensed foster parent. And from that point on, life just changes, right? So it was a long time ago. I was thinking about it as this new year rolled around. I think we initially licensed in 2020. So we were licensed maybe 10, 15 years, somewhere in there. I can't remember exactly how long we were licensed. Over that course of time, had a series of kids through our home, and two of them ended up staying forever. So we're adoptive parents of two. One is 17 and a junior in high school, and one is 20. Um, kind of in and out of the house, that adulting thing is hard, y'all. And that transition is a little bumpy. So we're trying to figure out what that looks like. And sometimes you just need some support. So we're trying to navigate all that. And in my own caregiver journey, just sort of figured out pretty early on that I really wanted to be the best foster parent I could be. I really had a heart to serve kids and families, and I had no idea how to do that and do that well. And I needed help, right? So, child welfare is really complex. Caring for kids of trauma was bringing unexpected things into my home that I just needed some support helping navigate. And training was really my lifeline. So over the course of time, I just grabbed onto everything I could, and I just started educating myself and found ways to support the foster care system, support training, until finally I get to be here and sharing with you all. So I hope what I have to share is helpful with you and helps you wherever you are in your path. So let's get at it. As I mentioned, I'm going to start out and just tell you like a mini little blurb about what TBRI is, and then we're going to get into our topic of the evening. I mentioned really when we talk about trauma-informed care, trust-based relational intervention is just a way of doing just that. And I wanted to show you really briefly when we talk about TBRI and trauma-informed care, it's broken down into kind of three little categories. And when we talk about how do you rewire a brain for trust, connection, and safety that has experienced trauma in those earliest stages of development, really what you have to do, right? It is possible for one. That's the first message maybe of trust-based relational intervention. But really what you have to do is you have to go back and recreate what was missed in that initial attachment cycle and process. That attachment cycle and process happens really easily and naturally with infants, right? Baby cries, you pick them up, you comfort them, you feed them, you do all the things, and all this wonderful development happens, body, brain, and everything else, right? When that doesn't happen, when that cycle's disrupted, development is delayed. If we want to get that development back on track, we have to go back and recreate those steps that were missed. And really, that's what trauma-informed care does. So basically what TBRI is like, here's a way to do that. And they chunked it out into like 3 buckets, basically. They call them principles. So we have a connecting principle. Let's go and work on connection with kids. How can you feel safe in relationships? The second bucket, the second principle is empowering. What does this kid need so that they can learn how to self-regulate, both internally, right? What's going on inside of that kid, as well as in the environment. How can they navigate their outer world and their inner world? How do we help a kid regulate? And then third, how do we correct that kid in such a way that allows them to continue to feel safe in this relationship? Because trust is going to be a challenge due to those early experiences. So the only reason I mention all that is if you have a kid in your life or your world that is struggling in any of these areas, I just want you to know that there is information and training out there for you. We offer a whole suite of classes around this, and I'm not here to really do a TBRI commercial plug. I just want you to know it's there, it's accessible, it's free, it's 100% online, it's offered through the Alliance, just like this is. We offer an introduction and overview class that goes into what is TBRI, and then we offer an individual course on each of these three principles. So anyway, lots of information on that here at the Alliance if you're ever interested. So if you at any point as you're going along today think I'd like to know more about that TBRI stuff, I just want you to know it's there for you. So everything that we'll talk about today is going to support all of the TBRI principles that I talked about, and will fall under this category of trauma-informed care. Everything that we're going to talk about is going to be based in neuroscience and yeah, helping get that brain back on track. So let us begin. The information that we're going to be talking about today is shamelessly going to be lifted almost directly out of the book that you can see on the slide in front of you. So the CARES program approached me and said, hey, we are getting a lot of requests from caregivers saying they want more information about this. And what this is one of the chapters in this book. Let me see if I can make it look a little less blurry in my camera. I don't know that I can, but you can see it on the screen. So if you're not familiar with Robin Goebel, she is the author of this book. It's called Raising Kids with Big Baffling Behaviors. So hopefully the title is interesting to you. Well, it would be great if the title wasn't interesting to you. I should say that. But if the title is interesting to you, just know you're not alone. This book has been incredibly helpful and incredibly powerful in the lives of many of us. And Robin Goebel, the author, if you're not familiar with her, she's a licensed mental health therapist, but she's really specialized her practice in the areas of basically families working with kids with really high-level behavior struggles. She's also a trust-based relational intervention practitioner, so all this stuff really works together. And to be honest, she's just pretty great. She's pretty amazing. So a couple things just right from the beginning, I'm just going to drop in the chat box. And as we go along, you can decide if you want to click on any of this and follow any of this up. She has a website with a ton of free resources. And so it's not all just like read my book. She just has info sheets and where to go for this kind of help and this kind of information. And she has a podcast that is absolutely phenomenal. So if you're a podcasty kind of person, you will not go wrong listening to her. She's very plain talkish, right? She's not neuroscientist talking down to all the rest of us. So anyway, so just want you to know she's out there if you want more of her as we go along today. So just thought I'd throw that out there because I'm afraid I'll forget later. Anyway, so one of the chapters in her book is what we're going to be talking about today. And I am going to not take credit for the information we're sharing. It's not going to be, this is Sherry's cool ideas. No, these are Robin's great ideas. I just have the opportunity of kind of like paying them forward to you and hope that that's meaningful and helpful. And at the end, I'm going to tell you some other opportunities that you could kind of, that you could have to interact with this particular book if you're interested. So here we go. Here's our topic of the evening. How to not flip your lid when your kid is flipping theirs. So we are going to be talking about you, the adult, in the situation. Yes, we have kids with big baffling behaviors. Yes, we might have kids that are struggling with what we call emotional regulation. But the focus of at least the first part of our conversation this evening is going to be really talking about what we are bringing into this interaction with the kids that we work with. So when you have a kid that's doing the thing that is getting on your absolute last nerve, how do you not lose your stuff, whatever that might be and whatever that might look like in your particular world, right? How do you do that? Is that even possible? Let's talk about that. Let's unpack that and let's see what the experts have to say about that. So yeah, we're going to be talking about brain science, but let's talk about our brain science. And then the second half of our time together, as Rachel mentioned, I'm going to talk about this stuff first of all, and then we're going to turn the recording off. And then I just thought we'd throw it open for questions. So if anybody has questions, first of all, about how do I maintain my caregiver regulation, we can certainly talk about that. But also if you have a situation that you wanted to throw out and ask questions about, the description for this class was kind of like, do you have a kid that has a hard time with their regulating their emotions? You know, do you need some parenting strategies on how to help with that? That part of the class, you know, we'll just kind of use that as the question answer part of it. So I didn't prepare like a formal talk on like parenting tools on how to help your kids emotionally regulate. We can tackle those particular questions in our question and answer. I just don't want you to think we're not going to address that. So anyway, so we're going to talk about caregiver regulation, and then during our question and answer part, if people have any particular questions about a kid, a situation, we're going to throw that out. I'll take a stab at answering, and I would also love to hear any thoughts. We're going to pull on the expertise in this room as well to feed in on some of that. So anyway, that's kind of my thought about where we'll go with the time that we have together. 6:30 to 8:30 is the time that we have kind of set apart for us. So let us begin. How not to flip your lid when your kid is flipping theirs. So we're going to start by talking about this idea of flipping your lid. Where does all this talk about flipped lids come from? What does it mean? This analogy of flipping your lid is something you hear about a lot if you're hanging out in the child welfare world. Maybe you rolled your eyes when we even said it. I don't know how you feel about it. Anyway, but it's talked about a lot. One of the reasons it's talked about a lot is because of the gentleman that you can see on your screen right there. This is Dr. Dan Siegel. I'm going to play a short video of him in just a moment. But what Dr. Siegel has done is he's taken this kind of old-fashioned analogy of flipping your lid, which I had in that earlier picture, right? A pot that's about to boil over. And he's related it to brain science, right? And then he's taken that idea of a pot boiling over and a stressed brain and kind of used the example of his hand to illustrate what's going on in a brain when it's stressed, and tied all those things together. And I know this is going to be very, very familiar to many of you. And if that's the case, just sit back, enjoy the refresher, right? And if any of you this is new to, this is a super helpful way, super simple and helpful way to understand what is going on with a brain when it is experiencing fear, stress, threat, or anything that could be perceived uncomfortable in that way. So anyway, I'm going to let this play through, and then we're going to kind of use this as we go along with the rest of the things we'll be talking about this evening. So here we go.
One of the most rewarding experiences for me has been to study brain science and apply it to the experience of parenting. And the hand model of the brain that I use to teach parents is very useful to understand that. So if you take your thumb and put it in the middle of your palm, put your fingers over the top, this is a very useful model of the brain. And when we can actually see in front of us what's going on in the brain, then we can change what the brain does. So let me walk you through very basically what happens in this brain and the structures in it. And it goes like this. The spinal cord comes up, representing the wrist, and then you have coming up into the skull the brain stem and the limbic area, which work together to help regulate arousal and your emotions and the way you have a fight, flight, freeze response. These are below the cortex, the limbic and brainstem areas, and the cortex is this higher part of the brain that allows us to perceive the outside world, to think and reason. And this frontmost part of the brain, right behind your forehead, so the person's oriented like this, is actually the part that regulates the subcortical, limbic, and brainstem areas. This regulation is very important because sometimes we can have all sorts of things happen in our life. We're tired, we're exhausted, someone pushes a particular emotional button, and we can flip our lids. So rather than being tuned in and connected and balanced and flexible, we can lose all of that flexibility, even lose moral reasoning, and act in ways that are terrifying to others, including our children. Now, you can actually bring yourself back online and come back to the high road and make a repair with your child, and that's important to explain it to them. And you can also use this hand model of the brain to explain to children, even as young as 5 and 6, how to understand when their emotions are rising up from the brainstem and limbic areas here, and how it's overriding the prefrontal area and making it so they may be about to flip their lids. So I've had kids come tell me that they're about to go flip their lids and they need a break. They need a timeout. And by even just naming that, they can tame it. And that's the power of using the hand model for ourselves and our children to help us all make sense of what goes on in the emotional communication that we have in the course of day-to-day life.
All right, so short 2-minute explanation of what we mean when we're talking about flipping our lid. When we're talking about flipping our lid, we're talking about going from what we call connection mode, right? That's where all of this good thinking, reasoning, problem solving part of our brain is engaged. It's working. That's what's driving the ship, right? To what we call protection mode. That's where our protective instincts, our stress responses take over. So both have value. We need both parts of the brain, right? But when we're in protection mode, we're not able to provide thoughtful, right? Connected care to the kids that we're interacting with. So how do we stay here even when stressful situations are happening around us is really what we wanted to talk about today. So let's kind of keep building on that by thinking about this concept of regulation. Another word, kind of a buzzy word that we hear a lot about. So kind of like what I was just saying there, when we flip our lids, right, our brains are under stress of some sort. Maybe it's fear, it's threat, it's need, whatever. Um, that's true for us, it's true for our kids. Um, and when that happens, right, we're no longer able to maintain what we call regulation, right? We move from that thinking brain, right, to our protection brain, that little piece I just mentioned. But what do we mean by regulation? When you hear that word regulation, you don't have to answer this out loud, it's just a think question. When you hear that, what do you think of? Right? When you think about being regulated or being self-regulated, what kind of pops to mind? And that's sort of why I put these little pictures on the screen that you can see up there in front of you. So you got like the little monkey from the Lion King doing his little yoga thing sitting there. And the reason I put that one up there, Robin Goebel, again, the author of the book that this information is coming from. She says when she asks kids, she works on, how to build regulation skills with kids all the time. And she's like, when she talks about regulation and she asks them what that means, she says, a lot of the time they strike this pose because that's as far as they know what regulation is, right? And they cite it back to the scene out of the Lion King. But I think a lot of us don't really know what regulation is. We just talk about it. Or if we think about regulation, we think about it kind of and equate it with being calm, right? Well, if I'm regulated, I'm being calm. And I'm not saying that that's not a good definition in some senses, but I think for the purposes of truly understanding what's happening in the brain, we could build that out a little bit. So you don't have to toss regulation and calm totally out the window, but let's just kind of like pull back the lens on it a little bit. Um, so again, just a question for you to think about for yourself. This is just yourself, right? Do you think you can be regulated and not be calm? Can you be regulated and not calm? When 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 you think about it from a neurological point of view, um, the science would say yes, right? One of the things that might be helpful to keep in mind that when we talk about regulation, it's not necessarily a feeling, right? You can be regulated and be happy. You can be regulated and be sad. You can be regulated and be mad. You can be regulated and be frustrated, right? Regulated requires balance, um, but it doesn't mean that you have to be like devoid of feeling. Regulation really just means that wherever like emotional state you're in, you can still access your thinking brain, right? And you can still make decisions, right? Appropriate, healthy, safe decisions, right? So think about yourself. Can you picture a time where you've been all stirred up inside, whatever that is? It could be positive or it could be not so positive, but you were still able to think and make decisions. I mean, hopefully so, right? There's probably times where you've been all stirred up inside and you haven't been, right? And that's legit too. But that just means then that you've been into that protection, that fear stress part of your brain. So when we're talking about regulation, it just means kind of like, is your brain still in control, right? Is your thinking brain still in control? And you can do that with a whole host of feelings. And so you're not, I used to teach like kids all the time, what is calm, what does regulation mean? And I'd be like, it's calm yourself by yourself, if you're teaching self-regulation. And you don't have to like totally go away from that, but just kind of know it's when we're thinking about it, it's really more of that idea of balance, which is kind of what that other picture is suggesting there, right? Am I balanced enough that I can still get to my thinking brain if I need it? And if you look up just a general old like Merriam-Webster definition of regulation, that's what you're going to get a little bit more like regulation. It's going to talk more about like um, being governed or being under control. So those definitions still kind of work. So that's what we're going to talk about when we're talking about regulation today. A little bit more is how can we maintain our regulation? How can we keep our brains balanced and in thinking mode, even if our kid has flipped their lid, right? It does not mean you're going to be perfectly calm in those moments when your kid has flipped their lid. Because to be honest, that is physiologically and neurologically impossible. Just say it, right? I mean, I would love to be wonder caregiver who could pull that off. It's just not possible. So, how can we keep our brains like this when our kid's brain is like this? And that's a piece of work, y'all, because our brains, just to make things a little trickier, right, have something that we call mirror neurons. And you've probably heard of these too if you've been hanging out in this child welfare-y, brain science-y kind of world at all, right? Where our brains tend to reflect back on each other. And that can be positive or not so positive, depending on who's doing the reflecting, right? And we see this in all the time from infancy on. So I'm going to do a little example of mirror neurons with you all right now, and just kind of, we'll just see how it goes. So here we are. Have you ever been in a setting where somebody yawned and all of a sudden you look around and it's sort of like popcorning around and you all have your cameras off, so I can't see most of you. And I told you it was coming, so I might have ruined the experiment already. But those are a simple, kind of cheesy example of mirror neurons, right? Your brain sees something and subconsciously it reflects it back. With infants, it's super easy to see. You're holding a baby and you make a face, they make a face. You stick your tongue out, they stick their tongue out. They don't even know how to use all those little small muscles really yet, right? Subconsciously, their brain just does it because it's mirroring it back. It's really cute with a baby, not so cute when you've got a kid that's in a state of total dysregulation, right? Their lid is flipped. And guess what? It's really easy for us as the caregiver for us to mirror this kid, right? This kid's lid is flipped. What's going to happen to us if we don't do something to maintain our regulation? We're going to mirror them, right? Pretty doggone easy. So then we've got two flipped lids, two brains offline, two brains in protection mode. What? Who's in control here? Nobody, right? Um, when we talk about caregiver situations that go upside down, this is what we're talking about, right? We've got a triggered caregiver, we've got a triggered kid, and there's just nothing that can happen in between here that's going to be helpful or rational because there's just nobody in control, right? So we can't expect the kid to engage their thinking brain until we do, right? I mean, we have to take the leadership in that. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. How can we, in the state of a dysregulated kid, how can we be the ones to bring our brains back online? So that's what I want to share with you. And really, it's not me. It's Robin Goebel. So what she has for us today is what she calls a 4-step process about how to stay regulated. And it's, I mean, I don't know. I was gonna say it's not rocket science, but it is brain science. But it's simple stuff, just broken down step by step. I will say it's not super intuitive, right? It's not super natural. It's not what it feels like you want to be doing in the moment. But if we can kind of teach and train ourselves these things, we can start to train our brain what to do in these moments of stress and dysregulation. So they're super simple. They're right there on the screen in front of you. So we're going to talk about notice, acknowledge without judgment, self-compassion, and release tension. And for any of you, again, you don't have your cameras on, so I can't see you. Any of you out there that are rolling your eyes and thinking this all sounds super cheesy, hang in there with me. Yeah, I know. I know. But again, the science is behind it. So stick with me. We're gonna look at this, we're gonna walk through it. And I hope we can see kind of the difference that this might make if we can kind of utilize this in our interactions with kids. But the way we're going to do this, I don't want to just talk about it. I want us to kind of practice this. So I'm going to give us an opportunity to play this out in a couple scenarios. But I want you to have something to write stuff down with as you go along. So at this point, if you're able to grab hold of a piece of paper, a pencil, if you don't have that, the notes app on your phone, whatever works for you. You don't have to do a lot of writing, but I want you to be able to jot some stuff down, and then we're going to kind of keep referring back to it. Um, and and I'm going to give you a chance to practice what it feels like to be in a dysregulating situation with a kid. So I'm sorry you thought you were going to sit in a nice, a comfy little class tonight, but here I'm going to push you into the uncomfortable. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to choose your own adventure. Here are a couple situations that you can select from, or if you would prefer, scroll in your own experience with the youth and pick a situation that was highly triggering or upsetting to you. It does not have to be one of these ones. You can pick a situation, but pick one that had a big emotional response from you, one where you really struggled with your regulation. Or if you want to keep it a little more neutral, you could just pick one of these generic ones that I picked on the screen. So I've got a younger kid example and what could be a little bit older kid example is kind of what I was going for there. So you fill in the gaps of the situation. So create the scene, right? This is a field trip at the park and there's 20 kids and parents standing around watching while your kid's about to hit you while you're blowing bubbles, right? You have a migraine and this is the last straw in your day. Create the situation, whatever it might be. This is not your best parenting moment. Let's just say this isn't when you're super well rested, when you've had a coffee and everything is sunshiny and rainbows in your world. This is when you are kind of at your last gasping breath, and now this has happened, okay? So you will not have to share any of your answers out loud. So I want your unfiltered caregiver version, right? You are not going to be graded. Your licensor is not going to look at your answers, any of those sort of things. So be honest with yourself. So pick your situation. And the first step that Robin Goebel wants us to do, and she says the way you start this process is reflection. We don't start by doing this in the moment because honestly, none of us are that good to be able to stop in the moment and do these steps. You got to work up to that. You debrief by doing these steps. So we're looking back on this situation and here's what was going on. And the first thing you do is you think back and you notice, okay, at that moment in time, what was I thinking? What kind of thoughts were going through my head? And remember, it doesn't have to be your sweet caregiver, most in tune thought like, oh, poor darling. I bet you've experienced a lot of trauma, right? It doesn't have to be that. It could be, I really don't like this kid, right? Whatever it happens to be. What feelings, right? I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm frustrated, I'm overwhelmed. I never want to see this little human again, whatever it might be. Sensations. What does it feel like in your body? When you're in a high tension situation with a kid, what presents in your body? I tend to be a jaw clencher, right? When I'm in moments of tension. Any of you talk through your teeth? Don't you talk to me like that, right? Anyway, again, we don't have to be perfect. This is just a little honesty in the moment here, right? I also tend to have a lot of like tension in this part right here. Um, anyway, I'm a bit of a finger pointer as well. Not proud of that one, but those kind of fly out of my pockets if I don't control it. Um, and then think about this situation. What would you do if you've got a kid that's coming out about to hit you? Do you think you'd be grabbing that little arm? You can step this out as far as you want, but I'm gonna stop talking for just a second and I'm gonna just let you sit with your moment and just kind of jot down what you might be experiencing in these ways. And you can keep working on that if you need to. I just was gonna throw a couple of things out there to be thinking about. This step might seem minor, but if you can't notice it, you can't do anything about it. So this awareness piece is going to be essential. Um, but if you can notice it, you're going to be in your thinking brain, right? So that's like winning the battle almost in step one. If we can do this one, right? If we can do this one, if you can stay in your thinking brain, noticing, it's setting getting things off to a great start here. I will also say some of us aren't really good at identifying our own thoughts or feelings or emotions. Some people are super good at this, super intuitive at this. If that's you, excellent. You're going to be a little bit ahead of the game on this. For some of us that aren't, there's there's ways to build skill in this area. So I was just going to show you one, and this is just super briefly. We're not doing a training on this kind of stuff. This is just one tool. There's 1,000 tools out there to help teach um, naming emotions and different things like that. This is an emotion wheel. Most people, even the most, out of touch with their feelings types out there, usually can identify at least the big three, like I'm mad, I'm sad, or I'm glad, usually. Um, but there's a lot more nuances to our feelings than that, a lot more specifics we can get to. And if that's where things start to break down, this is where a tool like this can come in helpful. It's like, well, I know I'm angry, but what kind of angry are you? And that's where you just like, if you don't really know, you can just kind of start reading off some of the things in that category. Um, and be like, if someone else supplies the word or description, sometimes it could be like, oh yeah, that's a little bit closer to what's going on with me. So we can use this as adults. We can also use tools or similar tools like this with kids. Um, to help teach, we call this emotional intelligence, the ability to feel what we feel and be able to attach language to it. And there's something very powerful that happens in the brain when you can do exactly that, when you can recognize your thoughts and feelings and be able to articulate it with language, right? Even if it's just subconsciously in your own mind, but if you can articulate it, put words to it, um, it helps bring those connections together that were missed, and just helps with emotional development, a stage that was oftentimes missed in that attachment cycle. So anyway, if you have a kid that's struggling in this area, I'm giving a commercial plug here again. We teach a class here at the Alliance that's called Trauma Informed Emotion Coaching. It's not specifically for us as adults. That's really more kid focused. So if you really want like to really expand, like I've got a kid that's really struggling with just knowing and understanding their own emotions and me, how to interact with them around their emotions. We have it's a little mini class, it's a little 2-hour class on that, but it's really good and it's really helpful. So it's a little blurb on that one. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to notice, right? So you wrote some stuff down. This is what's going on in me when I've got a kid doing the thing, okay? And then step number 2 is acknowledge without judgment. So this can feel a lot like step number 1, but it's really the 2 distinct things. And so what I want you to do is I want you to look at that list you just wrote. And now I want you to try and remove any feelings of judgment, thoughts of shame, guilt, embarrassment, pride, maybe justification that might accompany anything that you just wrote down. Just acknowledge it. Yep, I feel this way, or I felt that way, right? Um, it might feel kind of forced or inauthentic, but just kind of try it. Just be like, yeah, it's just there. Because the truth is, we're all human and we're all emotional human beings. Humans are emotional creatures, right? We all have thoughts and feelings based on whatever circumstances we find ourselves in. And we have thoughts and feelings based on kind of what's going on inside of us and internally. You catch me on a day where I've got a migraine, you've got a whole different Sherry than on a day where I don't. I mean, it's just how it is. Feelings are not good or bad. Feelings just are. You don't get to choose your feelings. They just exist. You can tell me all day long, Sherry, you shouldn't feel that way. But guess what? I'm still going to feel that way, right? I have all kinds of power over what I do with my feelings, but I do not have power over what I feel. And I know that, I don't know, like that feels weird and it doesn't feel true because we can have some pretty terrible feelings, right? That our filter, our personal values, anything could be like, oh, that isn't right. Um, but you really don't get the opportunity to choose what you feel. Um, and this is a moment of acknowledging that, right? I get to choose what I do with my feelings, but I don't get to choose what I do with them. So when we acknowledge without judgment, it's just that, yep, I felt that, I thought that, and I just did because I'm human, right? Sometimes as caregivers, we think we should know better. We've had all this trauma-informed education. I know all these things. I've been taught I shouldn't act this way. I shouldn't think this way. I shouldn't feel this way, right? But guess what? We still do for all those same reasons I just said, because we're human, right? Um, when we should, right? Should ourselves, I shouldn't think like this. I shouldn't have thought that. I shouldn't have acted that way. They say when we're shoulding, right? Again, when they're studying the science of the brain, that should is an indication that we're in protection mode. Again, we're in the fear center of the brain when we're in that place of should. Um, and you can't regulate yourself when you're in protection mode. So we just have to acknowledge that we felt that way. We have to allow it to be true. And then we move on to step 3, which is the self-compassion. And I know this is the cheesy part. This is where people are rolling their eyes at me. I know you are. But this is where Robin Goebel, again, the author of this book, she says that in all of her experience, like without question, she says that this is the most powerful caregiving tool you can put in your toolbox. She says, this is the most, I'm going to read directly her quote because I have it in my notes, the most powerful tool you can put in your parenting toolbox. So I'm just going to pause. I'm going to let you think on that for a second. The big wig behavior specialist of the country right now is saying, if I could give you one gift, caregivers, this is what I would give you, is self-compassion. I don't know about you, but I mean, I had to think with that when I read that. Because I know for myself as like a trauma trainer, like I would think I want caregivers to be able to look beyond the behavior, right? And see the need. I mean, I would give you a lot of gifts. Self-compassion isn't the one that sprung to my mind, but I've got to think and respect where she's coming from enough that I take this out for a spin in my head to see where it's going. So it lends me to ask the question then, why do we need self-compassion? Right? If she's like, this is powerful, this is gonna be a game changer for you. Okay, why? Right? Where she's going with this relates to the needs of the kids that we serve. Um, if we're caring for kids with, as she titles it in her book, big baffling behaviors, but if you have a kid with significant caregiving need, whatever those needs might be, she says you're likely experiencing suffering, which is another word that I don't know that I would choose to use, but she did. And so I put the definition on the screen because I had to sit with that one too. So by suffering, by definition, they say it's a state of undergoing pain, distress, or hardship. Okay. So parenting or caregiving often includes painful moments, distressing moments, or moments of hardship. Oh yeah, right. I that I can get behind all day long. Like, and I don't think that's caring for kids of trauma. I think that's just parenting, right? I think there's painful moments parenting any kid, right? There's distressing moments parenting any kid, and there's hard moments parenting any kid. I mean, I think that's just it, right? And then you have kids whose brains were developmentally affected by trauma. You're going to up that need probably there, or that experience there. So I'm like, okay, I don't know that I'd use the word suffering maybe the way she does, but that's the word she's using. And so if we think that our caregiver journey, we're going to have painful moments, distressing moments, or hard moments, um, then that means we're having moments of suffering as a caregiver. Okay. Okay, I could get there. But it's not because this child is a terrible person. It's not because I'm a terrible person, like hating on the kids that I serve or I can't handle it or something. It's just because parenting this kid is hard, right? Or working with this kid is hard. Healing brains is hard. It's exhausting. It's all day. It's every day. Um, and when we go back and we look at our list, right, all those things we noticed, all those things we were thinking and we were feeling, um, if we find ourselves thinking, I can't stand another minute with this kid, right? That thought is springing out of the moment of suffering, right? If we grab that kid's arm in anger because we're like, no way are you hitting me one more time, right? Um, I'm not excusing these behaviors, but those behaviors is what she's saying are coming out of that moment of suffering, right? Where our brain is in that place of protection mode. And we are doing these types of protective behaviors. If we're screaming at our kid, again, not anything we'd ever choose or want to do, we're acting out of that moment of suffering. And a moment of suffering deserves self-compassion, right? Not excusing the behaviors, but the pain that led to those behaviors deserves some self-compassion. And when we're talking about self-compassion, it's really just that ability to see ourselves with a feeling of kindness. And if we can see ourselves with a feeling of kindness, then out of that feeling of kindness can spring a desire to ease that suffering or that hurting within ourselves. It's not self-pity. It's kind of the opposite of self-pity. What the research shows, I think is kind of interesting in this area, that it actually makes us more likely to figure out a way to make things better if we utilize self-compassion than just like, I suck, I always suck, it's always gonna suck, if we just stay in that place. Um, and I thought that was interesting, right? Because it almost seems like self-compassion is like giving yourself a pass on bad behavior, right? Or inappropriate behavior, whatever language you want to attach to it. So so I know these are kind of weird words she's kind of using here, and you're never going to see this on a caregiver recruitment poster, like, yes, sign up for a lifetime of suffering moments of caring for kids, right? Um, but when you're working with a kid and it's hard, like really hard, and we haven't had a chance to share stories, right? Here. And it's not always like that with every kid in every situation, but um when you're at that place where like every minute of every day is just hard and life is heavy, right? And you're thinking like, I don't know how to get through the next hour, much less till the next review hearing. Those that is a season of suffering, right? And how do we stay regulated, right? How do we keep our brains regulated when we're in that degree of pain, um, we have to be able to offer this to ourselves. We have to be able to see a situation for what it is, that this is hard, right? And and even in the hardest of situations, I deserve care and compassion too, right? So as you're looking at this list of things, like we said, we're going to look at these without judgment. We're going to try and be neutral about them. Now, how can you layer some self-compassion on yourself in there, right? It's probably going to feel weird. I think, mainstream America, we're not super good at this, right? These aren't kind of things we tend to reflect back on ourselves. What could you think? What could you say? What kind of attitudes could you incorporate towards yourself that would give yourself some grace, some compassion for the things that you were thinking and feeling and behaving and doing? If you don't have any ideas, I just threw a couple up here. You don't have to choose these. They might not fit, but maybe they could springboard your thoughts a little bit, right? I'm not going to read all of these to you because I think I have 11 of them up here, but like things like I'm not perfect, but I'm who this child needs, right? I'm strong and creative. I'm going to figure this out, right? I'm going to be kind to myself. It's okay to take a break. I'm enough. I have value even when I make mistakes. This is hard, but I'm really trying, right? You know, just a way to sort of reframe all the things we noticed um, with this other layer to kind of layer on top of it. Yes, this is all true. And so is this, right? And we're going to bring these two things kind of side by side. And kind of keeping an eye on my time here, I want to get to number 4. So the last step is, as we extend compassion towards ourselves, the next thing we want to do is we want to kind of pair that with some sort of gesture that's going to release some tension from our body, right? Um, this is going to bring into balance kind of the accelerator energy that pushes our brain into protection mode. What makes you flip your lid? That's going to take some energy to do that. And when we release tension out of our body, it's going to kind of subconsciously send a message to our brain that says, I'm safe. Brings that brain back into connection, right? And safety mode. Um, and so, as you're kind of looking at these pictures again, right? Or thinking about your situation again that you chose, um, and you're recognizing where the tension showed up in your body, how are you going to release that? Right? Deliberately release that. I mentioned my jaw. I mean, can you just imagine like unclenching, right? If you can accompany like an exhaley kind of breath as you're doing that, right? Depends on the position. A lot of times when I'm tensed, it can be like my like legs and thighs in my chair. Can you release those, right? A lot of times I push my feet against the ground or my toes against the ground. Can I release those? If you don't know how to release the tension, there's nothing wrong with a good old-fashioned kind of deep breath. When you don't know what else to do, right? In any of these stages, a good old deep breathing is the gold standard of any kind of regulation exercise. Um, so we just take a moment and release that tension. And those are her 4 steps, right? So to kind of sum it up, what do you do? I walked you through those. We took a scenario, we thought about what it felt like. Um, the way you take this information now, what do you do with this now when you walk out of this class? It's probably not super practical. At least this is what Robin Goebel says, that you like take this and start using it in the moment. She says the way you start with it is debriefing situations like we just did. So after the moment, when you have a situation with a kid that you're thinking back on, take yourself back through like we just did, right? Um, Start to recognize, start to notice, start to acknowledge, take the judgment out of stuff. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't even have to hit all the steps. Start with just step one, right? Start with step four. How do I release tension, right? You can start as small as you want with any of this, but just think about as you're playing it back over in your mind, how could I incorporate some of this? And what Robin Goebel says is that over time, you're going to start in the moment having some little whisper in the back of your brain start talking to you that's going to start catching before your lid's flipping. It's you're going to start hearing a little whisper of a voice somewhere in there that's going to send you a message, whatever your brain talks to you like. It's going to send you something that's going to say, hey, you're starting to deregulate, right? And it might sound more like, Sherry, you're kind of freaking out here, like whatever your self-talky language sounds like. And she said, to be honest, you're probably not going to be able to stop it because you're already on the path of flipping right there. But just the fact that you can hear it on the way up is huge progress. And she says pretty much every single family she works with gets super discouraged at that point. Like, I knew I was flipping my lid, but I couldn't stop it. I was knew all the things, but I couldn't fix it. And she's like, but that's actually a sign of progress, not the fact that you need to despair, you're never going to get this. So I just threw that out there and wanted to put this kind of like free throw analogy over there because this, like anything else, is a skill that's going to build over time, but it's only going to happen with practice. Like I said, we're working against the neural, the, we're working against the wiring of your own brain here. Like I said, if you have a dysregulated child, your brain is going to want to reflect that state as well, right? To do the exact opposite of that, you're having to rewire your brain in opposition to what it's naturally kind of created to do. And that's going to take repetition. The brain wires through repetition. So that's where the practice comes in. So, you're going to practice this and practice this and practice this. And like shooting a basket, sometimes you're going to make it. And and sometimes you're not. And it doesn't mean you suck at basketball. It just means you didn't make the shot, right? Even the most skilled basketball player is going to miss the free throw sometimes, right? You can be an awesome caregiver, and sometimes you're going to flip your lid. And sometimes you're going to nail it. And that's just how this work is, right? But when we understand what's happening in our kids' brain, what's happening in our brain, right? And how those two things play off each other, we know what we need to do, and we know how to reset, and we know how to continue to move forward. So that is, my friends, how not to flip your lid when your kid is flipping theirs. Couple resources I wanted to share with you. I mentioned Robin Goebel. If you haven't picked out, I'm kind of fangirling over Robin Goebel. She has on her website a bunch of free resources, and she has all these little, she calls them just info sheets. I'm going to drop a link into the chat for this one. And it is basically a sum up of everything I just spent the last hour telling you. So, oh no, I threw you her podcast. She has a podcast on this particular topic as well. That's the one I just put in there, but let me send you this info sheet too. So if you want this kind of in a handy form that you can like scan in, print up, stick on your refrigerator or whatever, works for you. I want you to have an easy access to that. She does ask for your email address, but then she emails this info page to you. So, and she has these on like 1,000 other caregiver related topics. So if you want to scroll through and see what's handy and easy for you, go for it. It's phenomenal what she has. And it's all free. Like, she's super generous with her stuff. Her podcast is great. Thousands of other, not thousands, hundreds at least, though, of other really great topics she has available on her podcast, and her info sheets are great. And if I have whet your appetite at all about the Raising Kids with Big Baffling Behaviors book, here through the Alliance Cares program, we do a book club on this book for training credit. So we offer a couple times a year a book club on this particular book. It is offered, it's kind of weird the way we do it. This book is a little longer. It is about 250-ish pages. So we've divided it up into 2 sessions. We do like a 2-session book club where we do the first 4 chapters, and then we come back and we do 4 more weeks and do the last part of it. You don't have to do session 1 to do session 2. We just finished session 1. Session 2 of this book club, which anybody is welcome to join, is starting in 2 weeks. So if anybody wants to do that, let me throw the registration link in the chat too, if anybody wants to sign up for it. And this is a very informal book club. The CARES book clubs are awesome, where you read a chapter, you show up, you chat about it. If you haven't read the chapter, show up anyway, right? It's not one of those, if you didn't read, you can't talk kind of book clubs. It's really just come share, get information, and get the support of your peers. So, and if you're interested in it and you can't make the January, February series of this book club, it'll be back around in May. It's going to start May 5th, will be the next time it's offered. So lots of further opportunities for more information on the big baffling behaviors, and more opportunities to read this book together with the CARES book club. So with that, I think I will say thank you for hanging in with me through through our time together tonight, talking about how not to flip your lid when your kid is flipping theirs. So Rachel, I think that's kind of the end of my official